Hi, my name is Cynthia Kilpatrick. I'm a professor in linguistics in TESOL, and I'm also the interim director of the English Language Institute. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about placement versus proficiency as we look at how the placement test that we use here at the ELI is right or maybe not so right for our program. So first, I just want to tell you a little bit about the ELI so that you understand what sort of institute we are. So as I said, we are the English Language Institute. We started in 1980, so we've been around UTA for many, many years, but we are not a credit academic program. Instead, we are what is called an academic English program. And our goal is to provide English language instruction to help our students prepare to enter academic programs. So in other words, we are helping our students learn enough English to be able to come and study in the academic credit programs at UTA. Now, in our program, we have 6 levels of increasing proficiency, and at the completion of our highest level, we consider our students ready to enter an academic program at UTA or at any college or university in the U.S. When we do placement for our students, we have to realize how important this placement test is because our program is very, very intense. Our students are in class 20 hours a week. They have 6 hours of listening and speaking class. They have 8 hours of reading and writing class, and they have 6 hours of focused grammar class every week. But they move up one level every 8 weeks. So in one semester, students complete 2 different levels of the program, and this is really a super intense program for them. So when we're placing students when they first enter our program, it's really crucial that we find the right level for them so that they are pushing their English skills forward, but the class is not too hard, nor is it too easy for them in terms of their English skills. So the placement test that we currently use is called the CAMLA EPT. It is the Cambridge, Michigan Language Assessment English Placement English Placement Test. And it tests 4 different skill areas with 80 questions. So 25 listening questions, 20 grammar questions, 20 vocabulary questions, and 15 reading questions. This is a timed test, so all of the students take the listening portion all together, and then they have 35 minutes to complete the last 55 questions of the test. Now, with CAMLA, we started using the CAMLA in 2016. So even though we've been around for almost 40 years, this is a brand new placement test for us. But it's really not clear that it's the right placement test for us. It's just maybe not as effective as we'd like it to be. Sometimes we feel like students are not placed well. And so we're trying to figure out how we can use CAMLA more effectively. And we have started a full-scale examination to see how this test is working for our students and our program and see if we can make it more effective for us. So just to know where we are in this process, because we've been using this test for the last year, we are gathering all of the CAMLA scores and placement data from spring 16 to spring 17. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is 6 different well, 7 if you count spring 2 of this year, 7 different sessions worth of placement data. And we're taking all of those scores, we're dividing them into subsection scores. So we get a listening score, a grammar score, a vocabulary score, and a reading score. In addition, we started in spring 1 having students take an exit exam at the end of the session. This is basically just a parallel form of the CAMLA so that we can have a direct comparison between placement at the beginning of a session and where students are at the end of a session. We can also see within a level where students are as they finish that level, if they're all at the same level, and we can compare progress across several levels by the same student. Clearly, we have very little data because we only have 1 session to work with on that. So we have lots and lots of data, but it is a pretty time-consuming task. So to start with this project, the questions that we're asking are really related to these subsections. So when we divide these tests into subsections, are we seeing students scoring relatively equally across subsections, or are they scoring higher in some sections and lower in others? And do some subsections seem to be most appropriate for certain levels? because there's so much data to look at, we are just going to talk today about one section of the data, and these are 38 students who entered in fall 2016. They come from a variety of countries, and they had a variety of placement scores and proficiency level ranging from 22%, which would put them in our very lowest level, all the way up to 93%, which would place them in our highest level of proficiency. So what are we finding? Well, when we look at our group as a whole, what we see is that students are scoring highest in listening and grammar, and they're scoring lowest in reading. And this reading score, they're really in the mid 40s for this, whereas they're hitting 70% on their listening and their grammar portion. Vocabulary is somewhere in between. Okay, and we thought this might just be a group effect, and maybe it's not that listening and grammar is an easier part of the test, but when we look at this across individuals, what we see is that over here on the left, we see where students scored highest. So listening is blue and red is grammar. And so what we see is that the bulk of our students score the highest in listening or grammar. This is just raw numbers of students who scored highest in those areas. And when we look at lowest scores, we see most students are scoring lowest in reading and lowest in vocabulary. So it looks like maybe those group scores hold true for our individual scores as well. But this really presents a potential problem for us, because what this tells us is that, according to the CAMLA, the majority of our students have much stronger listening skills than reading skills. But this doesn't necessarily fit with teacher impressions of where students are in terms of their English proficiency. In addition, it doesn't necessarily fit with what experienced TESOL professionals know about the skills of English language learners. So we often see students who are very high in listening and speaking and very low in reading and writing, or who may be very high in reading and writing and very low in listening and speaking. But we don't see both of those on the CAMLA. We really only see students who appear to be stronger in listening and weaker in reading. And this doesn't seem to be accurate for what we know about English language learners as a whole, or for the language learners in our program. So we're asking this question about whether or not all subsection scores matter for all of our students. So maybe the CAMLA listening section, because it isn't as challenging for students. Students are scoring really highly on this. Maybe this listening test really tells us something about students in our lower levels, but once you get to higher levels, we kind of expect everybody to do well on listening. So it doesn't really help us with placement at higher levels. It really only matters for placement in our lower levels. The preliminary results of our exit exam in Spring 1 actually support this conclusion, because when we look at our lower levels, we see a range of scores in the listening section. But when we look at our top 3 or 4 levels, really all of our students are scoring very, very well on listening. So in our high intermediate A, high intermediate B, advanced A, and advanced B classes, students have proficient listening skills, and this listening test isn't telling us anything that would possibly distinguish between a student in high A versus advanced B, and that's 4-level difference. On the other hand, maybe our reading section isn't really telling us anything about the lower levels, but it's really only telling us about the higher levels. And there are a number of reasons for this. One of these is related to time issues. So students have 35 minutes to complete 55 questions, and what this means is that many students don't actually finish the test, and the reading portion is the very end of the test. So students have to have strong enough English skills to complete all of the sections before they actually get to the reading section. The vocabulary section, which precedes reading, has some pretty difficult vocabulary on it, and sometimes students just give up before they actually get to reading, especially if their proficiency levels aren't very good. So I'm thinking that this reading section might really tell us something about whether students should be high intermediate A or high intermediate B or advanced A, but in terms of intermediate A or intermediate B, our lower levels, it's looking like maybe this test doesn't tell us much at all. So some other things we want to know as we move forward is whether scores correlate with grades and proficiency at the end of a term. We really want to see how students are progressing across levels, and if we're seeing jumps in scores at particular levels that we don't see at others. And overall, we just really want to be able to use these subsection scores to be able to place our students most effectively so that as they finish our program, they are really truly ready to go into credit academic programs and be the most successful students they can be. I'd love to talk with you more about this project. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. My email is cynkil@uta.edu, and I'd be happy to talk to you. Thank you.